want you to imagine for a minute that you have a friend. You met this friend when you started college, and y'all got along great. You became best friends, you were hanging out all the time, you were talking to each other all the time, you knew just about everything there was to know about this friend, and vice versa. Then, for one semester, your friend goes off to study abroad. And he's gone for the entire semester, and then he comes back, and this friend isn't really your friend anymore. He's still the same person, but he's changed. A lot of the things that you used to find funny, he now finds really dumb, or he's very pretentious, and he looks at things like, oh, that's so American, and he's kind of a douchebag. You don't really like this friend anymore, but you're still trying to remain that friendship because you've been friends for years now. But it's very difficult to do that because your friend has changed so much, and you definitely want to accept your friend, changes and all, because they're your friend. But at the same time, they're not really your friend anymore, and the things that made you friends are no longer there. That's how I felt about the 5th season of Game of Thrones. There are plenty of ways to adapt a series of books into a movie or a TV show or vice versa. There are plenty of ways to do that, but for the purpose of this video, to talk about the 5th season of Game of Thrones, I'm focusing on 2 ways. And these 2 ways are the ways that 2 popular shows have done things: The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. The Walking Dead TV show is based on an ongoing series of comic books, and what they've basically done is they've taken the skeleton from those comic books and made their own show and own story around it. They took a lot of the same characters and some of the same events and made their own thing. The characters have gone completely different ways than they did in the books. Events have happened or haven't happened like in the comics, or they happen for different reasons or different time periods. They've basically written their own story with a lot of inspirations from the Walking Dead comics, and they've done this from the very beginning. Game of Thrones is based off the book series A Song of Ice and Fire, which is also an ongoing series. They did things a lot differently than The Walking Dead did. They took the meat and the body and the story of A Song of Ice and Fire and made it into a TV show. They've pretty much done, from the beginning, the story of Ice and Fire. The same events, the same characters. They've changed, now, yes, they've changed things here and there. Little things. They've, added new characters, or they've changed characters in little ways. And I know a lot of book readers are going to say,
oh, they changed it in big ways because this person used a fork instead of a spoon at that dinner that one time.
So it wasn't exactly like it was in the books. But it's been pretty damn close, to the point that if I'm talking to someone who's a fan of the show and has never read the books, I tell them to not worry about reading the books until after the show, because I expected them to stay, like they've been doing for 4 seasons, pretty close to the books. However, in Season 5, something changed. I don't know why it changed, but it did, and it didn't change for the better. Now, Game of Thrones is basically doing what The Walking Dead does. They're taking the skeleton of the story and building their own thing around it. I've said it in other videos before, I have no problem with changing adaptations from source material, because that's what adaptation is, it's change. So I have no real problem with the actual changes. Some of the changes that they put in Season 5 were actually good. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are some changes here and there that I was like, wow, that's awesome. I'm so glad they did that. That was an awesome scene. But most of the changes have been very wishy-washy and very weak, and not telling a good or strong story. They've had scenes where literally the only purpose of that scene was to show a naked woman. And don't get me wrong, the woman was beautiful, but there was no other point to the scene. There was nothing else that pushed the story along. And if it did, a few episodes later, it was just a very weak way to have pushed that story along. For them to change the way that they're telling this story, it's very jarring. Book readers, myself included, were kind of perplexed, because this isn't the story that we were expecting. And a lot of the just TV show fans I've heard is like, this isn't the show I was watching last season. And if they want to continue to do the show this way by just taking inspirations from the show and telling their own story, that's fine. The problem is that they're not even doing that correctly. They're basically, they're doing like this kind of combination, and in my opinion, an abomination of Ice and Fire story and Game of Thrones TV story. They set things up to happen in completely different ways from the books, and then they made it happen exactly like it was in the books, which, because they set up this completely different thing, the end result made little to no sense as far as I thought. This show used to be good. It really did. It was one of my favorite shows. It had strong writing. It was telling a good story, whether it was exactly like the books or not. And now this show is just like every other show out there. It's basically thrown away good writing for shock value, for shock and awe. To say they're doing things like Walking Dead. Walking Dead has a bad habit of having kind of weak characters, and then when they decide they're going to kill them off, they give them a really big thing to do, or a really big speech, or a big monologue, or something really big. And that's what they've done in this season of Game of Thrones. Is there are characters that you could sit here and it was like, wow, that was a really good monologue, they're about to die. And then, oh look, they died. And that's not a habit that, one, they should get into, and two, that's not Game of Thrones, and that's also not A Song of Ice and Fire. But we've established that it's not A Song of Ice and Fire because it's the TV show Game of Thrones. So let's say this again. It's not Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was a very real telling of these people's lives in a fantasy setting, just like Ben says in Parks and Rec. It's telling real stories in a fantasy setting. And now it's basically telling over-dramatized fantasy stories in a fantasy setting. I think I kind of lost what I was trying to say there. Just like they lost what they're trying to do with the show. And for me, the most infuriating thing is the showrunners and George R.R. Martin himself are responding to fans' criticism of it that...
Well, you should have known from the beginning that, the show and the books are completely different entities, that there's going to be changes, that, you should never have expected, the shows to be the same as the books.
But they're also trying to impress on us...
Don't worry, the shows are going the same place as the books.
And they spent 4 seasons telling the same story that they told in the books. So they themselves can't decide if they want to tell the story from the books or if they want to tell their own story. And they're doing a bad job of it. They need to commit to a decision. Do you see why I'm annoyed? Do you see why I'm frustrated? I've really tried to defend this show all season. I can't anymore because the writing has gotten lazy. They've gotten lazy with the writing. It's bad writing. It's bad. This show used to be good. This show used to be special. The show used to be so much better than some of the other crap that's on TV today, and now it's at that same level of crap. This show used to be good, and now it's not. This month's Funko giveaway is brought to you by Tubby & Coos, Mid-City Bookshop in New Orleans. It's a great bookshop. I love going there. I usually talk to the owner about our opinions on Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, but we're giving away this Tyrion Lannister figure. Not this particular one, this one's mine. But I have another one boxed and ready to go. So if you leave a comment on this video or any of the other videos in June, you enter for a chance to win a Tyrion Lannister Funko figure. How do you feel about this 5th season of Game of Thrones? What are your opinions? Tell me what you think. Tell me in the comments. Let me know how you feel. Like this video, share it around so we can get other opinions from other people, and definitely subscribe to my channel so we can geek out some more. Thanks for watching. So Captain America, Thor, Hulk...